Hello friends, today we discuss next subtopic Bryophyta from kingdom Plantae. While studying this Bryophyta, we learn two new terms gametophyte and sporophyte. First we see some general features of this group. In Bryophyta, bryon means moss and phyton means plant. This group includes moss or moss-like plants. Bryophytes are non-vascular cryptogams. That means they are non-flowering, spore-bearing plants and they do not possess vascular tissues, xylem and phloem. Now about the habitat of bryophytes. Bryophytes are mostly terrestrial. That means they grow on land. They grow in moist shady places like rocks, but they need water for fertilization. That means they require both land and water for completion of life cycle. So the bryophytes are also called as amphibious plants. And this group includes about 960 genera and around 25,000 species. And the life cycle of bryophytes show sporophytic and gametophytic stages. Actually, these stages are found in lower plants. Now we see what are the sporophytic and gametophytic stages. Just simply you remember, sporophyte is a spore producing stage and gametophyte is a gamete producing phase. Now we study this in detail. Here we study difference between sporophyte and gametophyte theoretically, and later on we understand these two terms with example. Okay. First difference, sporophytes reproduce asexually while the gametophytes produce sexually. The second difference is sporophytes are diploid plants and gametophytes are haploid plants. That means the plant body which represents the sporophytic phase is made up of diploid cells and the plant body which represents gametophytic phase is made up of haploid cells. Hope do you know the difference between haploid and diploid? The sporophytes are diploid. That means sporophytes have two sets of chromosomes while gametophytes are haploid. That means they have a single set of chromosomes. Okay, that means the plant body is made up of diploid cells in sporophytes and gametophytic plant body is made up of haploid cells. How the spores produced in sporophytes. Here as the plant body is made up of diploid cells, one of the diploid cell acts as a spore mother cell and that diploid cell undergoes a meiosis and results in the formation of haploid meiospores. Do you know the meiosis cell division? What happens in meiosis cell division? A diploid cell divides to form a 4 haploid cells. Okay, that's why at the end of meiosis, a 4 spores develop which are haploid and these spores develop by a process of meiosis so called as a meiospores. Okay, while in case of gametophyte, gametes fuse together by a process of fertilization and which gives rise to a diploid zygote which contains 2n number of chromosomes. Okay, sporophytes produce spores and gametophytes produce gametes. In case of bryophytes, spore producing capsule represents a sporophytic generation. What is this? We'll see later on in detail. While in bryophytes, the vegetative plant body, that is a thalloid or it may be a leafy, that represents a gametophytic generation. Okay, this is the difference between the sporophytes and gametophytes theoretically. You may understood something or you may not, but when we study this with example, then both these terms will be clear to you. Okay, now we see the classification of bryophytes. As we know, bryophytes are amphibious plants, and these bryophytes are divided into the three groups. First, liverworts, also called as a Hepaticea. Second group, hornworts, called as a Anthocerote. And the last one, mosses, which is also called as a musci. Now about the thalloid structure or gametophyte. In case of liverworts, the thallus is green and dorsiventrally flattened. Okay, and it is prostrate with unicellular rhizoids. You can see the diagram. Example of the liverworts, Rixia and Merkensia. This is a diagram or a picture of a Rixia. You can see it has a thalloid body, and you know thalloid means which is not differentiated into root, stem, leaves, and it is somewhat flattened irregular structure. Okay, this is green in color because it is autotrophic, it contains photosynthetic pigments. What is dorsiventrally flattened? Dorsiventrally flattened means it is flattened from dorsal as well as ventral side. So you can see a flat structure it has. Okay, then prostrate thallus. What is this prostrate thallus? Prostrate thallus means here it grows horizontally, not erect or vertically. That is called as a prostrate. Okay, now next group, that is hornworts or Anthocerote. In this case, the plant body has a flattened thallus as usual as like a liverworts. But what is the difference in this? You can see here a elongated, somewhat horn-like structures develop from the flattened thallus. At the base, you can see a flattened thallus is there, and from this flattened thallus, a horn-like structures, erect structures develops, which, and because of the presence of these horn-like erect structures, these bryophytes are called as a hornworts. And the example, Anthoceros. Okay, that is the name of this plant and which belongs to hornworts. Here this thalloid plant body in case of the liverworts as well as in case of the hornworts or Anthoceros, this flattened structure represents a gametophytic phase. Okay, while and from this gametophyte, here in case of the Anthoceros, you can see a horn-like sporophyte develops. Okay, then the third is musci or mosses. In this case, the plants of this group possess erect plant body. You can see here the picture of the funaria. Examples, funaria, polytrichum and sphagnum. This is a picture of a funaria. Here you can see the plant body is erect. It grows vertically. Okay, and now about the rhizoids. If you compare the rhizoids, what are these rhizoids? Rhizoids are root-like structures which performs all the functions as the root performs. Okay, in this case, in case of these two primitive groups of bryophytes, the rhizoids are unicellular, that means made up of a single cell. These rhizoids are meant for attachment purpose, for fixation to the substratum. Substratum is a thing on which it grows. That means it may be a soil or a rock, and along with the fixation, it also absorbs the water and minerals from the soil or rock. Okay. But in case of the funaria, which belongs to this musky group, here the rhizoids are multicellular. Okay. And the plant body is erect, it grows vertically, while in these two cases the plant body grows prostrate, that means horizontally it grows. But again there is a difference in case of liverworts and hornworts, is that in case of hornworts, a sporophyte develops which looks like a horns. That's why the name hornworts is given to this group. Okay. This is about the classification of bryophytes. Now we study what is this gametophyte, what is this sporophyte in detail with the example of funaria. In case of funaria, gametophytic phase of the life cycle includes two stages, namely protonema stage and a leafy stage. The protonema is a prostate, green, branched and filamentous. You can see in the diagram here, this is this elongated, the filamentous rod-like structure is, you can see here in this diagram, and this is nothing but the protonema, which is also called as a juvenile stage. That means a very primitive or a beginning stage. It is a beginning of the development of the plant, and this protonema is filamentous green in color, and you can see here somewhat filamentous brown color structures are seen. These are the rhizoids. Okay, and this is the first stage of the gametophyte. Gametophytic phase, in case of funaria, gametophytic phase represents two stages. One is protonema, which you can see in the diagram. This elongated flattened elongated rod-like structure, which is a filamentous structure, it represents a protonema stage. Further, this filamentous structure or a protonema bears number of buds, and that bud further grows into a next stage, which is called as a leafy stage, which is produced or developed by the bud which develops on the protonema, which is a first stage of gametophyte in funaria. Here, as these buds develop into a next phase or a next stage of the gametophyte, that means it shows a vegetative reproduction. You know about the vegetative reproduction? In vegetative reproduction, a vegetative part of the plant body develops into a new plant body, or which reproduces to form a new plant body, and such kind of reproduction is called as a vegetative reproduction. And in this case also, this bud further develops into a second stage of the gametophyte, that is a leafy stage. Now we see what is this leafy stage in detail. Here along with this you can see this brown colored structure or filamentous structures or rod-like structures are there, which are nothing but the rhizoids, which are multicellular in funaria. Now we see the next gametophyte stage or a second stage in funaria. Here, look at this diagram. You can see it is a second stage of gametophyte. Here you see at the base, a multicellular rhizoids are there, and that bud develops into a leafy stage, which is a second stage of the gametophyte. This second stage of gametophyte, it is erect, and you can see it has a stem like elongated structure, and that stem like elongated structure is called as a colloid. And around this colloid or a stem like axis, a leafy structures develop in a spiral manner. These leafy structures are not true leaves, but they look like leaves, so called as a phylloid. As I told you in the beginning, bryophytes do not possess true leaves, true roots, or true stem. So the bryophytic plant body is a false plant body where the structures develop which resembles with the true root, stem or leaf. Okay. Here this entire structure represents a gametophytic phase, a second stage of the gametophyte. Here, as I told you, gametophyte produces gametes. You can see here the two branches are there. This branch is called as a male branch. Actually, male branch is a main branch, and at the tip of this male branch or a main branch, a male reproductive organ develops, which is called as an antheridium. At the tip of this male branch, antheridium develops, which is a male reproductive organ, and because of this antheridium, this main branch is called as a male branch. Okay, while the lateral branch grows, and at the tip of this lateral branch, a female reproductive organ develops, which is called as a archegonium, and that's why this lateral branch is termed as a female branch. As I told you in the beginning, gametophyte produces gametes. This antheridium is a male reproductive organ, and inside this male reproductive organ, male gametes develop, and these male gametes are called as anthrazoids. Getting my point? While the egg cell, which is a female gamete, develops within the archegonium, which is a female reproductive organ, which develops at the tip of this lateral branch. Now, by process of sexual reproduction, what happens in sexual reproduction? There is a fusion of male and female gametes. Here, anthrazoids, as I told you, anthrazoids are the male gametes. These anthrazoids are motile. They have a flagella. That means they can move from one place to another place. Okay. So these biflagellate anthrazoids, which are motile, they move from male branch to female branch, and where this male gamete fuses with the female gamete, which is present inside the archegonium. After fertilization, the zygote develops, and that zygote further develops into a second phase, that is a sporophytic phase. Okay, and this sporophytic phase of funaria has four parts. The basal part, which is present at the junction of the sporophytic phase and a gametophytic phase, that point of attachment is called as a foot, and it has a sporophyte has a elongated structure. This elongated structure is termed as a seta, and at the tip of the seta you can see a globus or a bulbous structure is there, which is called as a capsule. This capsule represents a sporophytic phase, and within this capsule spores develop. Okay, and this capsule is covered with a special lead like structure, which is called as a calyptra, and on maturity this capsule bursts and the spores comes out. Okay, in this way the funaria shows both gametophytic and sporophytic, both phases in a one plant body. You can see here this lower portion represents a gametophytic phase, and this upper portion represents a sporophytic phase. Getting my point? How the life cycle goes on in funaria. As I told you, sporophyte bears spores and gametophyte bears gametes. Sporophytes bears haploid spores. Okay, these haploid spores on maturity comes out from this capsule, and when falls on the ground, that haploid spore develops into this gametophyte. Okay, spores are haploid. That's why the developed gametophyte is also haploid. That means it is multicellular, but each cell is haploid. So the gametophyte is haploid because it develops from a haploid spore. And after fertilization, that means after fusion of male gamete with the female gamete, zygote develops. Zygote is a diploid cell which contains two set of chromosomes. That's why from this zygote the sporophyte develops. That's why the sporophyte is a diploid. Getting my point? And from this sporophyte, by a process of meiosis, spores develop which are haploid, where the diploid cell undergoes a meiosis to form a haploid spores. These haploid spores falls on the ground, and from haploid spore, a haploid gametophyte develops. Okay. First, that spore develops into a protonema, which is a first stage of gametophyte. From this protonema, the number of birds develop. One of the bird further develops into a second stage, which is a leafy stage, and this leafy stage is a second stage of a gametophyte. As it develops from a haploid spore, that's why the gametophyte is haploid. I told you gametophyte bears gametes. So in this case, you can see the two branches. The one branch is a male branch. At the tip of this male branch, a male reproductive organ develops which contains the male gametes called as anthrozoids, and that male reproductive organ is called as the antheridium. While at the tip of the lateral branch, a female reproductive organ develops which is called as the archegonium, which contains a female gamete. Okay, in this way from gametophyte, gametes develop, and by a process of sexual reproduction, by a process of fertilization, male gamete which is motile, it moves, and here it unites or fuses with the female gamete, which results into the formation of a zygote. Zygote is a diploid cell. Further, that diploid zygote develops to form a plant body which represents a sporophytic phase. That's why the sporophyte is a diploid, because it develops from a diploid zygote, and gametophyte is a haploid because it develops from a haploid spore. Okay, this is about the gametophytic and sporophytic phases found in bryophytes. Now we see the economic importance of mosses. Some mosses provide food for herbivorous mammals as well as birds. They have a great nutritive value, so used as a food. Second economic importance is here a special species which is a sphagnum, used as a fuel. As the mosses have a significant water holding capacity, mosses are used as a packaging material for transport of a living materials to keep the living material fresh. Then the next economic importance is, as the mosses grow on rocks, they decompose the rocks and convert it into soil. When a dense layer of mosses grow on a soil, it helps in binding the soil particles, thus it prevents the soil erosion. Here we have done with the bryophytes. Today we stop here. Thank you.